We can't let this go on any longer. 2023 has to be the moment that we actually do something. Go home, brother!
No! You promised!
And it is just wholesale slaughter of losing our urban forest, and that is going to accelerate now with the intensification rules in place.
Then it does become a matter of the developer thinking, well, you know, is this a resource that we can use?
Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Not as green as it might seem.
18% of urban Auckland is covered by trees.
And is that good enough?
It's not good enough.
Auckland Council's senior arborist, David Sketchstall. He says the goal is to have 30% of the city covered by its urban ngahere, its tree canopy. Auckland's 18% is better than Christchurch with 16%, but only Wellington hits 30% coverage. In Auckland, there has been increased planting on public land, but the removal of nationwide blanket tree protections in 2013 has seen thousands of private trees lost.
So we're talking 150 hectares of private canopy has been removed, of private tree canopy.
That was in 2016, the last time the urban canopy was measured.
We're estimating what's going on at the moment. We're losing probably about 1,000 trees a week in Auckland, at least. That's a really conservative estimate. But yeah, probably.
And these are mature big trees, are they?
Yeah, these are big trees, because they're the ones that are competing for development space.
That's because the race is on to densify New Zealand cities. New government planning guidelines mean where there was once a single-storey house, there could be multiple 3 or even 6-storey buildings. Some trees aren't going without a fight. 2 years ago, Mana Rako protesters occupied Rako trees for 245 days in Auckland's Avondale. Arborist Zane Wedding camped in one to highlight the loss of urban Rako and what that means especially for Māori.
A tree like this, more than anything, is kind of that window into te wao nehera, like olden times. A rako like this, particularly Pahutakawa, would be used throughout our burial processes. Our tupapaku, our bodies would be laid amongst these branches, just like what we see here, and then their flesh would be poured into the soils to join with these rako.
Zane Wedding says the biggest impact is in the poorest areas where there are higher Māori and Pacifica populations. The stories are lost and life is more uncomfortable. Right, so what are the readouts here between the shade and the heat and the footpath?
So we have two sort of like targets showing on the screen.
This thermal heat reader shows 17 degrees in the shade, 30 degrees on the sunny pavement. So it's twice as hot out there on the pavement as under the tree.
Yep. Shade.
We are in Mangere, a suburb with just 10% tree cover. On the council's Heat Vulnerability Index, Mangere and many other South Auckland suburbs do not rate well.
The street is zoned for terraced housing and apartment building, which means that we may see up to 6-story high buildings being built on those properties that are single lot.
Keeping the trees not only keeps the suburb cooler, the trees provide oxygen, soak up stormwater and reduce blood pressure. So how do you balance the need for homes and the need for trees?
So we start with can we use these trees, and if we can, how do we design around it? And that's what we've got here in Avondale.
Kāinga Ora, formerly Housing New Zealand, is one of the biggest residential developers. Its Highbury Triangle site is typical intensification. 15 houses and flats are being replaced with 5 6- to 8-storey high apartment blocks containing 236 homes. In the middle of the construction site, 2 Pahutakawa trees which have been preserved and 1 resident duck.
And what we've learned is actually access to green space, access to places where they can connect with each other, connect with the natural environment is actually a really important part of successful intensification.
It doesn't happen on every site. At another Kāinga Ora build, this kauri stood tall while the local area was levelled. But it didn't last. The soil was contaminated with high lead levels. But the aim is to view trees as a resource, not a liability. Arborist David Sketchjal says the design process should be reinvented.
Perhaps we could turn it upside down and start with trees and say we would like to have canopy cover on this street of 20%. let's plant the trees on the street and then let's design around it.
Pro-tree activists have been busy lobbying the government. More than 2,100 submissions to the Natural and Built Environments Act were about urban trees. Associate Environment Minister Phil Twyford acknowledges the current system is inadequate and is working on a new approach. Mel's Barton from the Tree Council says the new law should create a national standard that councils then have to put into practice. She proposes one known as the 3-30-300 rule.
And it's about being able to see 3 large trees from your house, from everybody's house, for aiming for 30% of coverage, tree canopy coverage in each suburb, and only having to walk 300 metres to the nearest urban green space or park.
Developers like Kāinga Ora favour flexibility.
It becomes difficult if you don't have the control to be able to say, oh, this works well, this is something we can definitely do. These other trees, actually there are reasons why we can't use these trees in these environments. So the flexibility to be able to do that is obviously really important for us.
New government policy can't come soon enough for Zane Wedding. This week, he and others were discharged without conviction for the Avondale tree protest. And that, he says, justifies the fight to save the urban rako.
We can't let this go on any longer. 2023 has to be the moment that we actually do something to strengthen our ability to build resilience into the system that allows us to still be sitting under this tree in 50 years, 100 years from then, for people to still be sitting under this rako. And it's the decisions that are made right now that will make that so.
And Minister Phil Twyford says he is working on new tree protections as part of the wider reform of the resource management system. He says to expect more information soon. E haere akane. Plenty to explore there with our political panel, Finn Hogan, Georgina Stilianu and Sarah Perriam.
But first, can we trust what we see? Finn Hogan investigates the rise of deep fakes.
What we do is so far-reaching.
Rehabilitate it and then release it back to the wild. That's the outcome we always hope for.
The first time she went over the Tiger Bridge, I almost cried.
She was our priority. All of a sudden, there was a baby there.